Welcome, everyone. My name is Alexis Capiatis, Partnership and Business Development Manager at the Caribbean Hotel and Tourism Association. On behalf of CHTA, I'd like to welcome everyone to the Travel Trends, Hotels Performance, and Consumer Travel Insights webinar. As a reminder, CHTA webinars are a member benefit. If you have not updated your profile or paid your 2019-2020 dues, please do so after the webinar. Also, we hope to see you all in the Bahamas for our upcoming 2020 Caribbean Travel Marketplace taking place January 21st to the 23rd. Registration is currently open. Before we proceed with the webinar, let's go over a few housekeeping items. This presentation is being recorded and will be distributed to our CHTA members. Outside of the main presenters, all participants have been muted to avoid disruption from latecomers and to minimize distractions. If you have any questions during or after the presentation, please send them via the chat box to our CHTA host, myself, and they'll be answered in the order they were received during the Q&A section. The webinar will last approximately 1 hour. Now, I would like to welcome Emil, Business Development Executive at STR, who will be leading the Travel Trends, Hotel Performance, and Consumer Travel Insights webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexis, and thank you everyone at CHTA and everyone on the line for joining us today. First of all, I want to apologize. I've got a bit of a cold, so if I sound a little hoarse or nasally, the good news is that no one has ever caught a cold from me over a webinar, so we can be thankful for that. We have some great things to talk about today. I want to start by looking at how 2019 is wrapping up for hotels in the Caribbean and the rest of North America, and then we can compare performance from destinations all over the Caribbean before we actually look into the future at STR's 2020 outlook for the region. And finally, we'll end with an in-depth analysis of a survey STR did of travel consumers to understand their motivations when they're planning their travel. So first, just a reminder of what STR does and where our data comes from. STR works with hotels and destinations all over the world to give them the information that they need to be able to make the best business decisions possible. And our data comes directly from our hotel partners, so it's reliable information right from the source. But more importantly, we always keep that individual data completely confidential. We never share data from individual hotels, owners, or brands with anyone. That way we can provide the valuable and actionable market level data that benefits everyone, and local hotel associations can lobby for airlift, hotel-friendly legislation, and plan their own marketing to boost local tourism. So we're very proud to work with CHTA to support tourism in the region, and we're certainly here to help all of you with anything that you need. So let's dive right into the data and take a look at the very latest data we have for the Caribbean. This is year-to-date data, and performance is mixed right now, but overall looking good for the region. The first quarter saw a very healthy increase in occupancy over Q1 of 2018, but now that we're almost all the way through the year, the supply growth is picking up and demand growth is really starting to dip. And that's pushed occupancy growth down for the year. It's in the negative territory, down 3.3% compared to this same time last year. The good news, look at those rates. ADR is so far almost 7% higher than this same time last year. Now, to me, there's no doubt that 2019 is going to be a record year for ADR in the Caribbean. We'll have to see how supply and demand growth play together to affect occupancy the rest of the year. That's really going to be the determining factor in whether the Caribbean beats the old record of $138 RevPAR that it hit back in 2015. But right now, we're right there at that $138 mark, and I'm betting that we're going to have a strong holiday season to finish the year with RevPAR ahead of that previous record. So to give you an idea about just what a great year the Caribbean is having right now, take a look at the rest of your North American neighbors. This is looking at year-over-year change in occupancy in blue and ADR in red, with the yellow dots showing RevPAR change. You can see that Mexico continues its downward trend in occupancy and rates, with RevPAR down more than 7% compared to the same time last year. And Canadian hotels had been riding that wave of the country's 150th anniversary celebrations in 2017, but the party is definitely over up north. They're in negative territory now for RevPAR growth for the year. And even the U.S. has seen mediocre performance so far in 2019. Year-to-date occupancy growth is now negative, 0.1% negative, and 0.9% ADR growth is at least positive growth, but it's certainly nothing to brag about. You know, it's common to hear, as goes the U.S., so goes the rest of North America. So if hotel performance really is starting to soften, if the upturn is now over, then at least the Caribbean has given itself a nice head start, and you've got momentum going into 2020 to help you out. So, you know, these absolute numbers right here really highlight just how well Caribbean hotels are doing. The summer months gave Canada and U.S. a lift in occupancy and rates, and you know, conversely, it brought occupancy down for the Caribbean. But you can see the Caribbean is towering above the rest of North America in ADR. And even with that dip in occupancy since the first quarter, the Caribbean is still selling nearly 2 out of 3 rooms on average every night of the year, and with rates nearly $100 more than your continental rivals. And it's not just about seasonality, though. You know, things have been slowing down for the U.S. and Canada for a while, especially in the first 3 quarters of 2019. When you look at the 12-month moving average data, that annualizes the data and takes out seasonality, but you can see that downward trajectory of occupancy and ADR growth in the U.S. They're still growing at least, but they're certainly slowing. Occupancies are at all-time highs, so it's no surprise that it's getting harder and harder to grow occupancy. But when hotels are more full than they've ever been, we would expect to see even higher rate growth. 1% annualized rate growth is not bad, but again, it's nothing to write home about, especially when you consider that the inflationary growth rate is around 1.82% as well. So that really means that true rate growth in the U.S. is now completely non-existent. And to highlight that lack of pricing power for U.S. hotels right now, take a look at this. The U.S. has had 6 months this year with ADR growth of less than 1%. Not a good sign, considering we went 8 years before that without a single month below 1% rate growth. And October rate growth, as a matter of fact, wasn't just below 1%, it was negative. It was down 0.5% over last October. That was the first month in the U.S. with negative rate growth since 2010. So not a good sign. Luckily for the Caribbean, the trends are still mostly moving upward. Occupancy, ADR, and RevPAR growth had been on a decline leading into mid-2017, but things have certainly turned around since then. Even though rate growth, or even though growth has slowed in the last quarter, ADR and RevPAR growth are still very strong. And Q3 2017 seems to have been that turning point for the Caribbean, with ADR and RevPAR now at all-time highs. Of course, you've heard me say it before, the Caribbean is a vast and diverse region, so success for the overall region doesn't necessarily mean success for every individual market. So I like to show this slide. It lets you see some of the Caribbean's key markets and how they're performing year to date compared to the same time last year. And look at that, Bonaire is new on the board. They're leading the way with the highest RevPAR growth in the region, just over 30% RevPAR growth year over year, and the majority of that is coming due to occupancy growth. The Bahamas is the closest competitor right now in RevPAR growth, and similarly, it's based on completely on occupancy growth. Now, on the other end of the spectrum is Puerto Rico. Occupancy so far this year has declined by almost 10%, but Puerto Rico hotels have been able to flex their pricing power and grow rates enough to help offset that loss in occupancy. But they're still seeing a year-over-year drop in RevPAR right now at 5%. Now, Puerto Rico is a great example of how the hurricanes of 2017 have affected that market. There are a lot of new hotels coming online right now, and hotels that were down for renovations are coming back online, and that's really pushed the supply up, and that's what's driving occupancy down. And conversely, all that new product, that new enhanced product on the market there in Puerto Rico is driving rates up. So that really helps explain what's going on in that market. You can see here that Bermuda, the Dominican Republic, and the U.S. Virgin Islands have also seen RevPAR declines this year. And again, those are caused mainly by declines in occupancy. Here are the absolute numbers for each of those markets. That 10% drop in occupancy in Puerto Rico knocked them out of the 70% club. They're falling just short of selling, on average, 7 out of 10 rooms every night of this year. And the Dominican Republic lost their membership card as well. Now, Aruba is the new president of the club with the highest occupancy so far this year at over 75%. That's just amazing. And the Cayman Islands took the top ADR on this list with an amazing average nightly rate of $455. So finally, while we're looking into the future, let's look at what our analytics team believes is in store for the Caribbean in 2020. This is the 2020 outlook for the entire Caribbean region. So you'll notice those dots are not exactly precise. There is a range of possibilities. And it's because the Caribbean is that vast and diverse region that I talked about with a lot of really different destinations. But overall, the outlook is positive with occupancy growth likely for most of the areas. Maybe a little tougher to grow rates in 2020 because we've come off such a high rate growth year. But RevPAR growth is expected for most markets next year. STR does offer custom forecasts on your exact property in Comstead or just your local market. So if that's something that you're interested in, please do let me know and we can help you with that. But overall, great news for next year. All right, well, let's shift gears a little bit and move from hotel data to some information and insights into consumer behavior. For this study, a total of 2,228 travelers who had been on an international leisure trip in the last 12 months were surveyed. And you can see that the sample reflects a pretty wide range of demographics. And for the purpose of this presentation, we're calling that range of ages from 16 to 34 the millennial group. And the first question we asked these travelers was about how long their vacations lasted. And just remember, this is focused on international travel, so you'll notice a longer average length of stay than your typical domestic traveler. In this case, the average vacation lasted 13 nights. I wish I could take a 13-night vacation, but with only 9% of these travelers traveling for 3 nights or less. It's also interesting to note that 38% of vacations involved visiting multiple international destinations in the same trip. A thorough understanding of when and how travelers plan their vacations is really critical to the travel industry. This information can help determine the messaging and the timing of marketing campaigns, as well as identify the most suitable channels for marketing and promotional efforts. The average travel planning process begins almost 6 months in advance, with the choice of destination being the first thing that people look at. Notably, the planning of travel and accommodation takes place simultaneously, on average 4.5 months before the vacation. And the results suggest that vacation planning is an ongoing process with travel budget planning happening roughly 4 months in advance and activity planning occurring a little bit later, maybe 2 or 3 months in advance. In general, travelers 55 years old and older plan much further in advance than millennials. The question is, where do travelers go for information when they're planning? They were most likely to turn to online review sites. In particular, 40% went to TripAdvisor. Booking.com saw 15% people visiting that. Personal recommendations were important to 51% of travelers, while 37% relied on guidebooks and apps, and 20% turned to social media. Some of the key motivations for international leisure travel are well known. You know, you've got that experiencing different cultures or relaxing and unwinding. And these sorts of motivations are often weighed against practical factors like cost and distance to travel. We wanted to revisit the core motivations for leisure traveling and also understand additional factors that influence that choice of a destination. What we found is that almost 50% of all travelers were motivated by an interest in their location's history and heritage. This was especially the case for travelers 55 and older, while on the other hand, we had millennials who were more motivated by the opportunity to experience new places and cultures. This is maybe a reflection of the difference in life stage between those two age groups, with millennials more likely to be traveling to destinations for the first time. In general, motivations were linked to the destinations. You got heritage, culture, cuisine, architecture, with friends and family time and relaxing and unwinding also important. Value for money was a key factor regardless of age or life stage, though it is noteworthy that it was much more important to millennials than over 55s. Millennials were also more likely than average to place importance on the safety of their destination. In addition to value for your money, over 55s place great importance on ease of access to their destination and the quality of the accommodation, maybe a reflection of expectations linked to higher spend levels. Beyond the traditional motivations and factors that go into travel planning, a new set of issues have become influential more recently. More and more travelers need to be aware of issues such as over-tourism, travel bans, political tensions between countries, security concerns, and of course, environmental or weather events. When considered together, all of these issues can cast a shadow over the global tourism industry. But how important are they for individual travelers? And what we found is that results suggest high awareness and behavior are linked to over-tourism, with over 50% of all travelers highlighting an occasion when they've decided against traveling due to concerns about tourist numbers. 43% stated that they are always or often traveling at quieter times of the year to avoid other tourists. Travelers 55 and older were much more likely than millennials to have acted in that way. The influence of unforeseen or external events is clearly demonstrated by the finding that over 40% of travelers have lost interest in a destination because of factors such as political tension or terror threats. The impact on travel decisions seems equally felt regardless of age between the age groups. Millennials, though, and 35 to 54-year-olds and travelers 55 and plus, they were all equally affected by these factors. Social media platforms such as Facebook, Twitter, Instagram have become a part of daily life in most parts of the world. But the question is, to what extent is social media important when planning international vacations? Almost half of travelers surveyed use information on social media to help plan a vacation at some point. And you might expect millennials, 55% or 59% of millennials were most likely to have done this, followed by 35 to 54-year-olds and 55 and older in the final category. The difference between millennials and over 55, which came to 23 percentage points, suggests that the travel industry really has to continue to recognize the importance of a diversity of marketing channels, so you're reaching everyone where they can be reached. Overall, 36% of travelers had used Facebook for travel-related content, with YouTube and Instagram being used by 17 and 16% of travelers, respectively. Booking accommodations and travel is integral to any international vacation, of course, but to add to that, understanding and reacting to traveler expectations during these decisions and transactions is really key for the travel industry. Traveler booking habits highlight a fundamental difference in approaches to flights and accommodations, with direct airlines airlines website by far the most common booking method for flights, while OTAs, or online travel agencies, are much more evident in accommodation bookings. On flights, direct on airlines website was equally popular regardless of age. But when you're talking about booking accommodations, millennials were much more likely than average to prefer booking via an OTA, whereas travelers 35 to 54 were much more likely to book direct on the hotel's website. And interestingly, travelers 55 and over were more likely than average to book using a travel agent. So what is it about OTAs that make them so attractive to travelers when booking accommodations? I know as a previous hotel manager, that was always my question. And what can accommodation providers learn from OTAs to give them a slight advantage? Our results showed that 55% of travelers who had booked through an OTA cited a desire to see all accommodation options as a reason for using that service, regardless of age. Convenience is also important to travelers of all ages, whereas millennials were more likely than average to book via OTAs because of potential savings. Convenience and the best deal are clearly important regardless of booking platform. And as many direct bookers highlight, these are key reasons. In fact, 66% of millennials highlight convenience as their reason for booking directly with the provider, and 50% of 35 and 54-year-olds feel the same way about accessing the best deal. It's difficult for accommodation providers, of course, to address the traveler desire to see all accommodation options. You're not going to show all your competitors on your website. But developments in online booking platforms and the ability to offer deals are both avenues open to accommodations to help. In the case of value, there is an opportunity to further develop reward and loyalty strategies, which is an area that has been underutilized by the accommodation sector in recent years. The growth of online travel brands, coupled with increased consumer demand for new, unique, and authentic experiences, has really fueled the development of the sharing economy. The accommodation and transport sectors in particular have seen the greatest levels of disruption in response to these trends. So to take the pulse on this issue in the accommodation sector, we set out to evaluate awareness and usage of a range of home sharing platforms and engaged consumer attitudes specifically towards Airbnb. Used by 41% and known by over 90% of travelers, Airbnb is by far the most popular home sharing platform of all the sites evaluated. North American travelers in particular demonstrated high levels of engagement with this 2008 startup. The next most popular alternative accommodation site was HomeAway, and it was used by only 9% of travelers and known by roughly 35%. Interestingly, this site was more commonly used by travelers aged 55 and over. The opposite was true with Airbnb, with younger travelers showing significantly stronger interest and engagement. Travelers were asked about their attitudes towards the Airbnb, and you can see here that there was mild agreement that Airbnb tends to offer more authentic experiences than hotels. However, compared to 2017, this marked a slight decline in that indicator, perhaps an important impact of improved hotel marketing and product offerings in providing more individual experiences. Similar to last year, there was also mild agreement that hotels offer a more reliable form of accommodation in terms of cleanliness and safety. Overall, there was evidence of moderate support for Airbnb. It is evident that younger travelers are particularly strong proponents of Airbnb. This is highlighted here in this chart that shows much greater recognition of authentic experiences at Airbnb compared to hotels among this group. U.S. travelers also demonstrated a warmer relationship with the brand compared to other nationalities. Around half of respondents cited potential issues with Airbnb. A lack of trust with the landlord was the key area of concern, 24% citing that, followed by worries about sharing accommodations with guests and a lack of confidence in the accommodation being of the standard advertised. Interestingly enough, issues associated with reduced safety and lower levels of cleanliness, two areas which anecdotally tend to be associated with Airbnb, were notably less referenced by these travelers. So to wrap everything up, tourism plays a vital role in the global economy. So it's very important, more important than ever really, for businesses, governments, and other organizations to follow the data and understand the travelers who make it all possible. From what we've seen today, the data is showing a healthy tourism industry for the Caribbean going into 2020. And sure, supply growth is really taking off in the region and putting pressure on occupancy, but rates are stronger than ever before. Now, as supply growth normalizes in 2020, we should see continued RevPAR growth for most markets, but again, it's very important to know your guests and understand their ever-changing needs and attitudes so that you're reaching them when and where they need to be reached. It's also all about creating memorable experiences for your guests while they're with you and a positive and hassle-free experience when they're planning and booking their stay. Understanding that mindset of today's traveler will help you make the best decisions when you're planning your marketing as well as your rate and channel strategies. Obviously, the more information you have, the better decisions you're going to be able to make. So that's it. Thank you all so much for bearing with me in my cold today. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have, but also please do connect with me via email and definitely send me a connection request on LinkedIn so you can get my constant updates.
Thank you so much, Emil. And yes, I encourage everyone on this call joining us on the webinar to please reach out to Emil. He's amazing. He has such great information. And also, Emil and the SCR team will be attending the upcoming Caribbean Travel Marketplace. So if you are attending as well, please stop by and see him or reach out and make an appointment, connect, definitely. So yes, now it's time to open up for the Q&A section of the webinar. Please recall that everyone is muted and you do not have the capability to unmute yourself. However, please use the Zoom group chat to submit any questions. And we have already received a few. So Alicia Valentine asked on slide travel planning earlier in the deck, Is this specific to Caribbean or all leisure travel?
So this was for all leisure travel. Yes, is not specific to the Caribbean. So that's a great question. I'd love to do something a little more specific to Caribbean visitors, but this was considering all international travel around the world.
Thank you, Emil. To quickly answer Belinda's question, yes, you will receive a copy of this entire recorded webinar as well as the deck, and it will be available in the secured CHTA member portal. So Emil, next question for you. You showed us that US hotel performance has slowed down and that the upcycle of the last 10 years is pretty much over. Does that mean we're going into another sharp downturn like we saw in 2008 and 2009?
Yeah, that's the question everybody's asking, definitely. You know, we've all been spoiled by a decade of steady growth, and of course, all things eventually have to come to an end. But that doesn't mean that I'm going to be Chicken Little and say that the sky is falling. So, you know, I don't, you know, even if this is, which it is, the end of the upcycle, I don't see us going into a sharp downturn. You know, there's always the possibility that there's going to be what we call a black swan event, another 9/11 or another Great Recession like we had in 2008 that could send us into a spiral. But barring anything like that that's unforeseen, I think, you know, we're going to kind of bounce along where we're going to have good months, we're going to have bad months, but overall things are going to grow very slowly over the long term. So we're not going to see those years of 5-6% year-over-year RevPAR growth anymore. It's going to be maybe, you know, 1% or even less. But that's really, you know, it's going to be the smaller factors that are going to cause a good month or a bad month. An example of that is in September of this year, the U.S. hotels saw negative RevPAR growth. It was, you know, I think only the second time that we've had negative RevPAR growth over this last 10 years. And it was because we had an additional Sunday and one less Saturday in the month. So, you know, in scientific terms, 5 Saturdays good, 5 Sundays bad. That one calendar shift caused the national RevPAR growth to go negative. So small things like calendar shifts, weather events, they're going to be even more important. So the good news is, you know, there's no big crisis on the horizon, but we all do need to get better at using our data to plan our rates and our marketing. So, you know, that will help us drive, you know, every dollar possible, because we're going to feel the influence of those little factors more and more. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. Now, you say using the data is important for improving performance, but is this something only large hotels can use? Like, for example, are the star reports really useful for smaller hotels?
That's a great question. You know, to me, I think data and the star reports in particular are even more important for smaller independent hotels. You know, the big hotels and the brands, they've got a lot of resources behind them to help with their revenue management and their marketing, while smaller independent hotels are kind of on their own to do what they can do. You know, my last job as a general manager, I was managing a small luxury 20-room property. And I'll tell you, you know, when you only have 20 rooms, every room counts even more. You know, a hotel room is the most perishable thing you can ever sell. You know, if you don't sell it, or you sell it for too low of a price, you're never getting that back. So being able to know what your market's doing, what your competitors are doing, to help you get every dollar you can for your rooms is so important. So yes, I think it's very, very useful for smaller hotels. You know, even hotels that don't spend a lot of time on rate management, the owners can use the star reports just to show the value of their baby. It's a great third-party document that you can use if you ever are wanting to borrow money or even sell your hotel. It's a great document to let you show how beautiful your baby is. So yes, it's very important.
Right. Wow, that's great. Thank you. So we have another question here from Alicia Valentine. In terms of the impact of rental industry, has STR seen any particular hotel markets taking a hit more than others?
So, that's a great question, and a lot of it is based on supply growth. So some markets are not seeing a lot of supply growth, so they're taking advantage of demand and they're being able to grow occupancy. In the markets where there's a lot of supply growth, Dominican Republic, for example, they're growing like crazy. Puerto Rico has seen those supply growths. Mexico in general is growing supply like crazy. So those areas are seeing real pressure on occupancy, and the more pressure on occupancy you have, the more likely it is for hoteliers to say, "Oh man, I need to pull back on my rates," which isn't always a wise decision. So yes, typically the bigger markets with more supply growth are suffering more than those smaller markets. Again, it's going to depend on the market. So but yeah, there is definitely a difference.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you. So you talked a little bit about Airbnb in your presentation, and there are a lot of different opinions about them. What is your opinion on Airbnb, and are they a threat to hotels?
Great question. I don't think Airbnb is a big threat to U.S. hotels, but in regions like the Caribbean, I really think it's something that we have to keep an eye on. In the U.S. we have drive-to markets, so there's not really a hard limit on demand. But in the Caribbean, the Caribbean is all fly-to markets with limited airlift. And that means that there's a ceiling on demand. So when Airbnb is getting a bigger and bigger piece of that demand, it's a real problem for hotels. So that's just another reason that hotels need to be active members of CHTA or even their local hotel association, and participate in the STAR data, especially so that those associations can have that information and that they need to lobby for airlift. I mention this all the time. Your data is going to help your DMO, your Destination Marketing Association, or your hotel association be your advocate to get more airlift, to lobby for hotel-friendly legislation to level that playing field against Airbnb. So, yeah, to answer your question, absolutely. All types of accommodations are fighting for that guest, and in the Caribbean, it's becoming more and more of an issue, I believe.
Okay, thank you, Emil. At this time, if anyone else has any questions, please send them via the Zoom group chat box. In the meantime, though, please take note of Emil's email address, his Twitter, LinkedIn. Please, reach out to him if you plan on attending Caribbean Travel Marketplace, so you guys, can meet in person and further connect. This recorded webinar, as well as the deck, will be available, like I said, in the secured CHTA membership portal, so you can always refer to it there. I don't see any further questions coming in. I just want to go ahead and thank Emil so much for your time today, and everyone's time as well for joining this webinar. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. Have a great holiday season.
Yes. Have a great one, everyone.